To the human observer, a dog watching a television screen appears to be engaging in a shared cultural pastime, a domestic tableau of interspecies leisure. However, this anthropomorphic interpretation ignores the fundamental biological divergence between primate and canine sensory processing. While the human brain integrates 24 to 60 frames per second into a seamless fluid motion, the canine visual system operates on a significantly higher flicker fusion threshold. What we perceive as a coherent narrative, many dogs perceive as a rapid, strobing sequence of static images, a phenomenon that places an immediate, idiosyncratic load on their neurological architecture. This investigation moves beyond the surface-level interest a dog shows in a screen. We are deconstructing the physiological cost of digital consumption. By analyzing the intersection of phototransduction, neuroendocrine signaling, and evolutionary behavioral circuits, we reveal that watching TV is not a passive act for Canis lupus familiaris, but a complex neurochemical event that often challenges the animal's physiological homeostasis. The interaction begins at the level of the autonomous nervous system, ANS. When a dog is exposed to high-frequency visual and auditory stimuli from a screen, the body initiates a shift in the sympathovagal balance. Research from institutions such as the Royal Veterinary College has utilized non-invasive biotelemetry to track these immediate shifts. When a predatory or high-motion sequence appears, we observe a rapid transition towards sympathetic dominance. This is characterized by heart rate variability, HRV, reduction, a decrease in the interval between heartbeats, signaling a withdrawal of the vagal brake. Peripheral vasoconstriction, blood is shunted from the skin and digestive organs toward the skeletal muscles, a preparatory state for action that never occurs. Tachypnea, an increase in respiratory frequency that serves no metabolic demand, creating a state of respiratory alkalosis. Unlike a hunt in the physical world, which has a clear beginning, middle, and resolution, the digital stimulus provides no consumatory phase. The dog remains in a state of physiological suspension, aroused but with no motor outlet for the generated energy. Beyond the immediate fight or flight response lies the more insidious activation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis. When the canine brain perceives an unresolved stimulus on a screen, such as the bark of a digital dog or the movement of an unreachable prey animal, the hypothalamus releases corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH. This triggers a neurochemical cascade resulting in the secretion of cortisol from the adrenal cortex. Studies at the University of Linköping, specifically those led by researchers investigating long-term stress markers, have demonstrated that repetitive exposure to high arousal environments leads to cortisol accumulation. While blood cortisol provides a snapshot of acute stress, analysis of canine hair cortisol reveals the chronic state of the animal. The digital dog is subject to allostatic load, the wear and tear on the body which grows when an individual is exposed to repeated or chronic stress. The HPA axis does not distinguish between a physical threat and a high-fidelity digital representation. The hormonal output is identical, leading to a systemic inundation of glucocorticoids that can, over time, suppress immune function and alter metabolic efficiency. The canine brain processes visual information through a dual-stream model, but the speed of digital media often bypasses the prefrontal cortex, PFC, the area responsible for top-down regulation and logical assessment, and directly stimulates the amygdala. In the context of canine cognition, this leads to a phenomenon known as cognitive bias. Research at the University of Pennsylvania has explored how chronic arousal shifts an animal's judgment of neutral stimuli. A dog frequently exposed to the chaotic, unpredictable stimuli of a TV screen may develop a pessimistic cognitive bias. Sensitization. The neural pathways associated with fear and vigilance become hyper-efficient. Amygdalar hypertrophy. Frequent activation of the amygdala strengthens these circuits, making the dog more likely to interpret a household sound, a dropped key, or a closing door as a potential threat. The brain loses its ability to filter irrelevant information. The screen acts as a white noise of threat, keeping the prefrontal cortex in a state of permanent bottom-up interruption, preventing the animal from reaching a state of deep cognitive rest. To understand why dogs remain glued to a screen despite the physiological cost, we must look to Dr. Jacques Panksepp's theory of affective neuroscience. Panksepp identified the seeking system as a primary drive in all mammals. The moving images on a screen provide a supernormal stimulus for the seeking system, dopamine-driven and dopamine-dependent. However, this seeking is never rewarded with a find. This brings us to the work of Martin Seligman and the concept of learned helplessness. If a dog is repeatedly exposed to the sounds of distressed conspecifics or the visual cues of predators on a screen that they can neither influence nor escape, they may eventually enter a state of behavioral depression. The animal may appear calm or settled while watching, but neurobiologically, they may be experiencing a form of tonic immobility. The stimulus is overwhelming, the motor response is frustrated, and the brain eventually shuts down certain exploratory behaviors as a survival mechanism. This is not relaxation, it is a profound failure of the animal's agency over its environment. A dog's reaction to a television is never isolated. It occurs within the sociobiological field of the human-dog dyad. Research into interspecies heart rate synchrony shows that dogs often mirror the physiological state of their owners. If a human is watching a high-tension thriller or a violent news segment, their own sympathetic nervous system activates, releasing sweat gland, secretions, pheromones, and changing their heart rate. The dog, a master of olfactory and bioacoustic detection, picks up on these signals. Studies on cortisol S-synchronization, often cited in work from the Max Planck Institute, indicate that the chemical tension in a room is contagious. The screen creates a feedback loop. The screen stresses the human. The human emits stress signals, cortisol, adrenaline. The dog perceives the human stress and the screen's stimulus. The dog's HPA axis activates, further stressing the human through behavioral changes. This electrochemical mirror means the dog is not just watching a show. They are experiencing the owner's physiological reaction to that show, creating a shared environment of heightened allostatic tension. What are the long-term consequences of chronic digital exposure on the canine brain? We observe a process of neuroplasticity in reverse. Chronic elevation of cortisol leads to the atrophy of dendrites in the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory and emotional regulation. Robert Sapolsky's work on the neurobiology of stress highlights that prolonged exposure to glucocorticoids eventually leads to receptor downregulation. The brain becomes less sensitive to its own regulatory signals. In dogs, this manifests as adrenal exhaustion, a paradoxical state where the animal may eventually show abnormally low cortisol because the system can no longer meet the demand, leading to systemic burnout. Synaptic pruning of the PFC. The calming centers of the brain weaken, while the fear centers, amygdala, become structurally reinforced. Altered sleep architecture. The inability to transition from the vigilance of screen watching to the REM state required for neural repair. The result is an animal whose neurochemical threshold for stress has been permanently lowered. The digital dog is an animal living in a state of chronic sensory overload, where the boundary between the predatory reality of the screen and the safety of the home has been biologically eroded. When we strip away the human narrative of entertainment, we are left with a stark biological reality. A dog watching television is an organism processing a high-frequency, unresolved sensory input that triggers ancient survival circuits. Through the lens of evidence-based ethology, we see that the digital screen is a neurobiological disruptor. It challenges the dog's physiological homeostasis, taxes their neuroendocrine architecture, and reshapes their neural circuitry toward a state of permanent vigilance. As we continue to integrate digital media into our shared domestic spaces, the onus remains on the understanding of these interspecies differences, not through the lens of human emotion but through the cold, hard data of canine neurobiology.